Welcome back to Courtroom Conversations, right here on the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel. I'm Dylan Brooks Hamilton.
And I'm Susan Kelly Ashford.
You know, those inheritance disputes.
Yeah.
The ones that just leave you shaking your head like, how could it even get to this point?
Exactly. And today's case is one of those head scratchers.
It involves country music star Kellie Pickler.
And she's locked in this legal battle with her late husband's parents.
Over his belongings after his passing.
Really highlights, the importance of having clear legal documents, but also how grief and family dynamics can just make everything so much more complicated.
Right. So let's back up for a second. Kyle Jacobs, a very talented songwriter, tragically died by suicide in February of 2023.
Yes, and it's just a deeply personal and painful situation for everyone involved, obviously.
Of course. And to make things even more complex, it seems that Kyle didn't specifically say who should manage his estate after he was gone.
Right, and that's kind of where the legal wrangling begins.
So his parents, Reed and Sharon Jacobs, stepped in to handle things, which, is pretty standard when there's no designated executor.
Yes, but here's where it takes a turn.
Okay.
Kellie is claiming that Kyle's parents went into her home and took some of his possessions without her permission. And we're not talking just a few little things.
Right. From what I understand, the list is quite extensive.
It is. The court documents lay out a collection that includes guns, swords, a Rolex guitars, even things like his old baseball cards and school awards.
I really wanted it all, huh?
Oh.
I mean, a Rolex I get, but baseball cards and school awards.
It seems that way.
So they're basing this on that prenuptial agreement that Kellie and Kyle signed before they were married.
That's right. A prenuptial agreement, spells out how assets will be divided if there's a divorce or a death. And in this case, the parents seem to believe it gives them the right to take these items.
So Kellie's fighting back.
Right.
Right? I mean, she's not just rolling over and saying, okay, take it all.
Oh, absolutely not. She's pushing back, saying that she's not even sure where some of the stuff is. She doesn't have certain things. And most importantly, she wants to keep some items that are very personal to her.
Yeah, imagine you lose your spouse and then have to fight their family for things that, hold memories of your life together.
It's adding insult to injury.
It really is. And so Kellie has taken the step of asking the court to step in to decide who has the right to these things.
And this is where it gets so interesting legally.
Right.
You have the legality of the prenuptial agreement and the rights of the surviving spouse.
Yeah.
Even one who agreed to the prenup, and of course that emotional aspect.
Right, because Kellie's still grieving while dealing with this whole legal battle.
It's a lot.
It is. So to better understand the complexities here,
Yes.
let's look at some of the specific items in dispute.
Absolutely.
And look at the arguments on both sides. Starting with that gun collection, it seems to be a big point of contention.
Yes, it does seem to be.
But wait, before we get into that, can we just clarify the roles here? The parents are acting as co-administrators of Kyle's estate. Is that right?
Yes, because Kyle didn't name anyone to administer his estate.
Yeah.
His parents stepped into that role, and as co-administrators, they're legally responsible for identifying, collecting, and eventually distributing all the assets of the estate.
So they're kind of acting like representatives of their son, even though obviously he's not here to say what he wants.
Exactly. Their actions have to follow the law and any legal documents like that prenuptial agreement.
But that doesn't mean their decisions can't be challenged, does it?
No, not at all.
Which is what Kellie's doing.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not necessarily saying the prenuptial agreement is invalid,
Right.
but she's saying it doesn't apply in this specific situation.
Yes, and especially when it comes to certain items with sentimental value.
And Kellie and Kyle were married for 12 years. So it's not crazy to think that some of their stuff would have gotten mixed up over time. You know what I mean?
Oh, of course they weren't probably keeping everything perfectly categorized as his and hers.
Right. Which makes this whole thing so much more complicated.
It really does.
Okay, so let's go back to that gun collection.
Okay.
Why doesn't Kellie want to give it to Kyle's parents?
Well, according to the lawsuit, she claims she doesn't actually know where all the guns are.
Oh, really?
Some are missing.
Huh.
Now, whether they were taken from her home without her knowing or just misplaced is unclear.
Well, if she really doesn't know where they are, how can she be expected to just hand them over?
That's a good question, and it's one her legal team is raising.
Right.
It brings up the question about whether the parents had the right to enter her home and take things.
Right. Were they acting within their rights as co-administrators or not?
And that's for the court to decide.
And, let's not forget the emotional side of things. Even if the guns were technically Kyle's separate property, according to that prenuptial agreement,
Yes.
they could still hold sentimental value for Kellie.
Of course.
Maybe they were used on hunting trips or represented a feeling of security in their home.
Absolutely. You can't just ignore those emotional attachments just because some legal document says who owns what.
Right.
This is about real people's lives, their memories and grief.
It's not just a list of assets.
Exactly.
Before we move on, everyone, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel if you're enjoying this deep dive.
We're back with Courtroom Conversations here on the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel and digging even deeper into this case with Kellie Pickler and the estate of her late husband.
We've talked about the guns, those swords,
Right.
and that Rolex, but this list just keeps going.
It does.
What else is on there?
Some of these items might surprise you. They're things that don't seem to be about money so much as sentimental value.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, get this, they're asking for Kyle's old baseball card.
Baseball cards.
And even his school awards from when he was a kid.
School awards. Seriously.
You heard that right.
I mean, I get a parent wanting to hold on to those,
Yeah.
but legally, wouldn't those be considered Kyle's personal property? And shouldn't they go to his wife?
That's what you'd think. But here's where the law gets tricky. Remember, Kyle didn't say who should inherit those things.
Right.
So they become part of his overall estate, which his parents are now in charge of.
So even those personal items, those things that probably mean more emotionally than they're worth financially,
Yeah.
they're subject to the rules of the estate and maybe even that prenup.
That's the argument the parents are making.
Huh.
But Kelly's lawyers are pushing back, saying that those items have a lot of sentimental value for her as Kyle's widow.
Right. They're pieces of his life,
Exactly.
of their history together.
Mm-hmm.
And they're arguing that she should get to keep them.
Yeah. It's like those objects, especially the childhood things, become these like touchstones for memories, after someone's gone.
Exactly.
It's about staying connected to the person.
And just to make things even more complicated, we know that Kellie has said she's willing to give up certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like she's refusing to let go of anything.
Yeah.
It seems like she's trying to find some middle ground.
She's acknowledging the legal side of things, but also saying that she has her own emotional connection to some of these items.
It's a tough situation all around.
It really is.
I'm curious, has a court ever had to decide who gets to keep things like a baseball card collection or trophies before?
Well, every case is different, of course, but there are legal principles that courts consider things like the length of the marriage,
Oh.
any evidence of what the person who died wanted,
Right.
and the emotional significance of the items.
So it's not just about what the law says on paper. There's room for interpretation and considering the human side of things.
Exactly, and that's what makes this case so interesting. It's not just about who has the stronger legal argument.
Yeah.
It's about finding a solution that recognizes the emotional complexities.
And we can't forget that prenuptial agreement. How much weight will the court give that, considering all of this?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Prenuptial agreements are usually upheld by courts, but there are exceptions. If
Yeah.
it can be shown that the agreement wasn't signed willingly.
Right.
Or if a judge thinks that enforcing it would be unfair in a certain case, they might be willing to change things.
So Kellie's lawyers could argue that strictly following the prenup in this case, especially with those sentimental items,
Yeah.
would be unjust or not what Kyle would have wanted.
That's one way they could go. They could try to show that the emotional distress Kelly's going through because of Kyle's death should be a factor in how the prenup is interpreted.
That's interesting legally.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see what the court does. But beyond all of that, we need to remember one thing.
Yes, this isn't just about legal stuff and who gets what.
Right.
We have a woman who is grieving.
Of course, Kellie Pickler is going through a very difficult and personal loss.
Absolutely. And on top of all that, she's having to fight for what she believes is right.
This reminds us that even celebrities, with all their money and fame, they're still human.
Right?
And they go through grief and loss just like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those losses lead to legal battles.
They do.
Okay, so looking ahead, what are some possible outcomes here?
Well, the court could side with Kyle's parents
Right.
and say the prenuptial agreement has to be followed exactly, which would mean Kellie has to give up all the disputed items.
That'd be tough for her.
It would, or the court could side with Kellie
Oh.
and say that the prenup shouldn't be applied so strictly
Right.
and allow her to keep some or even all of the items.
That would be a big win for her,
Mm-hmm.
but I imagine it would cause more problems between her and Kyle's parents.
It probably would.
And then there's a possibility of a compromise
Right.
where they try to work things out.
The court could order mediation,
Okay.
where both sides work with a neutral person to reach a settlement.
That seems like the best outcome, even if no one gets everything they want.
I think so too. It would allow Kelly to keep some of those things that are important to her while still respecting the legal side of things and maybe to some extent the wishes of Kyle's parents.
So a few different ways this could go. But no matter what happens, this case shows how important it is to talk about these things ahead of time.
Yes, to have those difficult conversations about what you want to happen to your things after you're gone.
Because it's not just about the stuff, is it?
No, it's about honoring the memory of the person who died and making sure their legacy is handled with respect.
And it's definitely easier to have those conversations when everyone's calm, not in the middle of grieving and emotional turmoil.
Absolutely. And besides those conversations, having a will or a trust is really important.
Yeah, those legal documents provide a clear plan for what should happen.
Exactly. It can help to avoid disagreements.
And as we've seen, even a prenuptial agreement isn't always enough.
That's true. Prenups can be helpful for
Yeah.
things you had before the marriage,
Mm.
but they don't always cover everything.
Right.
Or think about the emotional side of things that can come up after a loss.
So even with a prenup, it's still good to talk to your spouse and family.
Yes, make sure everyone understands what you want.
It's about clarity and communication.
And if a disagreement does happen, like in this case, it's crucial to get legal help early on.
Right. Get a lawyer involved to help navigate all of that.
A good attorney can help you understand your rights in the legal system and work towards a fair solution.
Even though we're seeing this case play out publicly because Kellie Pickler is a celebrity,
Yes.
these are things that anyone who's lost someone and dealt with inheritance has faced.
That's so important to remember, Dylan. These kinds of disputes can happen to anyone.
So as we finish up here, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
This case really shows how law and family and grief can all get tangled up together.
It does. We've talked about the disputed items, the prenuptial agreement, the arguments from both sides. But now I'd like to think about what this case means for other people who might find themselves in similar situations.
I think that's important, Dylan, because sadly, Kelly's story isn't all that unusual. Family disputes over inheritances happen all the time, especially after someone dies.
Right. And like we saw here, those disputes can get really bad when there's been a lack of communication or when emotions are running high.
Exactly. So what can we learn from this? What can people do to try and avoid this kind of conflict in their own families?
What do you think?
It boils down to communication, I think. And that goes whether you're a celebrity like Kellie Pickler or just a regular person. Dealing with these tough situations means having open and honest conversations with your family about what you want to happen to your estate while you're still able to talk about it. That can make a huge difference.
Yeah, it prevents misunderstandings later on
And prevents hurt feelings, too.
because it's not about the stuff, right? It's about
Right.
remembering the person who died and making sure their legacy is handled the right way.
Exactly. Those conversations might be difficult to start,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about death and money, but they're so important.
Definitely easier to have them when everyone's calm and thinking clearly, not when they're in the middle of grieving.
I completely agree. And along with those conversations, having a will or a trust is essential. It's like a roadmap for how your things should be handled.
And it can really help to prevent those disagreements.
It can.
We've seen that even a prenuptial agreement like what Kellie and Kyle had isn't always a perfect solution.
True, prenups can be useful to clarify who owns what, but they don't always cover every situation.
Right.
And they don't always take into account those emotional things that come up when someone dies.
So even with a prenup, it's still good to talk to your spouse and your family,
Right.
make sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely. It's all about clarity and communication.
Okay.
And I'd add that if a dispute does arise like it did, in this case, getting a lawyer involved early on is really important.
Getting a lawyer can help sort things out.
Definitely a good lawyer can explain your rights and the legal process and help find a solution that works for everyone.
This case is playing out in public because Kellie Pickler is famous, but these issues are something that anyone who's dealt with inheritance can relate to.
That's such a good point. These kinds of disputes can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter how much money you have.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into this complicated and sometimes sad case, what's the main thing you want our viewers to remember?
Don't wait. Have
Mm.
this tough conversations about what you want to happen to your things while you still can. It's a way to protect your loved ones and ensure that your memory is honored.
Great advice. And for those of you who are going through something similar, remember, you're not alone. There's help available.
And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel for more discussions on interesting legal cases.
That's right. Until next time, folks, stay informed and stay engaged. We'll see you on the next episode of Courtroom Conversations right here on the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel.